I want to start off today with just your evolution personally as an investor. Like, what did you initially start off investing in? And now, what is Buddy considered to be a deal today? Like, what's worth your time? Because I know that changes a lot
Yeah.
as you mature as an investor over time.
Yeah, it does. At the very beginning, and you can go back. There's a lot of podcasts and interviews and stuff. You just Google and you can find this story. So I'm not going to go into it in detail. It's a really good story though. So definitely go back and listen to the first deal I ever did. It was a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Um, but it was just scraping. It was like anything, everything, whatever. And then it evolved to I'll do anything that I need to do to learn how to do this thing. And so I was handwriting postcards to mail to people to try to get deals. We were cold calling, we were doing everything, and we had to be really creative because we didn't have any money. And so we were doing wholesaling and we were doing sub two deals and like seller financing and trust deed lending and all that. And I was learning all this stuff while in between deployments. But at the very beginning, a deal was just, it was like, hey, I was stationed in 29 Palms, and I was like, I want to buy a $70,000 house and rent it out for $750 a month, the whole 1% rule thing, and make a couple $100 a month of cash flow. And that's a really big deal because at the time I was making around $6,500 a month as a military officer. And so, when you look at like what you bring in after expenses, um, a couple $100 a month, right? So $2,400 a year. That's a multiple percentage increase.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
giving yourself a raise, right? So it's not just about the long term of, I really drank the Kool-Aid of when you buy rental property that has bank financing, your home price appreciates every year, your rent goes up every year, your appreciate or your the equity you have builds every year as it pays itself down, and you get the cash flow on top of it. So four pillars of rental real estate all happening at once, not to mention the tax benefits.
Mm.
And so I was like, whoa, the long term of this is like, at the time I was 25, I was like, man, by the time I'm 30, this could really be something. I could really have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of net worth, which was just a dream, right? Because when I first started, I was negative $70,000
Yeah.
net worth. Literally, like I was poorer than someone who had no money.
Yeah.
And
I hear
so
you.
and so I was like, well, $200 a month of cash flow. Well, that's a really big deal to me. Now imagine we do that every 6 months or a year. All of a sudden, you've got $1,000 extra a month coming in. That's a really big deal to somebody who's making 6 grand a month, right? And so that's what it started as. And it was at the time, all new investors typically, normal investors that don't have like trust funds or whatever, they start out where they have so much time and no money. So they trade time for money, right? That's what it was. It's just your time's not worth anything because you don't know anything either. And as it evolves over time, you start to evolve with it. So like I had this idea in mind that I wanted to build $10,000 a month of passive income, right? And for me, I was like, if it takes me 10 years, 15 years, whatever, I want to build 10 grand a month of passive income, and then I'll be able to just not have a job if I don't want to, and do what I want. That was the rough idea. But that goalpost moves over time.
Yeah.
And when you hit 10 grand a month, you're like, oh, well, this is great. But what if I wanted to travel the world with my family? I'm gonna need more than that. So then you start, right? And then it's like, well, what if I want to build something really cool to help a ton of people? Well, that costs money too. And so it evolves over time. And I'll tell you, the most powerful thing you can do to build a life of financial freedom is to create a structure where you are rewarded for helping other people accomplish their goals,
Mm.
right? So Zig Ziglar said it. He said, if you want to live the life of your dreams, help other people live the life of their dreams. Or Diamandis says, if you want to become a billionaire, learn how to help a billion people, right? Tony Robbins and everybody, all the greats of the past, they all have some saying that's similar. That's like help other people, right? And you'll get what
Hmm.
you want, right? And so you have to be smart about it. You can't just go out and just willy nilly give your time away and not have a structure around it. But so for me, I was like, well, what if we built this community of people who are all out there doing what I'm doing? So just we're out there finding deals and doing deals, but what if there were dozens or hundreds of us all out there going to do deals? Everybody's building this together. It's more fun. And when you're out there searching for deals, you always find deals that are good deals, but that you can't take them down. You don't
Mm.
have the money, you don't have the time, they don't fit your portfolio, you whatever. So do you let them go to waste? Or if you have a community, can you turn around and just offer them to somebody in your community via joint venture or wholesale or whatever? Now imagine hundreds of people doing that. So you create this hive of people that are out there now finding hundreds and hundreds of deals. And this goes to your question of how it evolves over time.
Mm.
So then over the past 5, 6 years, I've now got hundreds of people that are out there doing deals and finding deals. And the biggest deals in the history of White Feather have come from other people that find these deals that they can't take down themselves. And they send me an email and they say, hey, what do you think of this? And if you go on my YouTube channel, you'll see interviews that I did with several of them last year and the year before, where, a guy does, like Justin, he gets this deal under contract for almost $6 million, 11 properties in Daytona Beach Shores, Florida, brand new, never been lived in, just been finished, right, with construction. He gets them locked in for just under $6 million, and he's got like 3 days to give $300,000 earnest money, and like 60-day inspection period and so on to come up with $6 million. He doesn't even have he's got like 8 grand in the bank when he makes this offer, right? But he comes to me and he says, what do you think about this? And I'm like, well, dude, your market analysis, everything, it's all tight. Let's find out what these are actually worth. So we did a snap appraisal on them. Took 48 hours to do an appraisal. So if an appraiser ever tells you it's going to take a week and a half, like, just know that if you pay him enough money, they can prioritize it.
Yeah.
And so he went out and did it, and we got the appraisal back, and he had these locked up, 11 properties at a $150,000 discount each one, brand new properties,
Wow.
right? So almost $2 million of equity in this thing.
Jeez.
And so if left to his own devices, he can't, he didn't have the 300 earnest money. He didn't have the 5 million. It would have just whoop, gone by. And you try to
Mm.
go wholesale somebody, you try to go wholesale a deal like a $6 million deal just right now. Now you
Yeah.
got 3 days to wholesale it, right? You might be able to do it, Kirby, because you got a big network and but it'd be hard even for you, I would imagine.
Mm. Yeah.
Right now, imagine a new guy.
Yeah. Right.
Impossible.
Yeah.
It's not a deal for him. It's impossible for him to do it. But for an established network like what I have, it absolutely is not impossible. So I was actually traveling through Central America at the time, and I sent an email out to about 400 of White Feather investors, and we got like 70 people on a Zoom call. And we showed them the deal. And we said, what do you think we should do? And everybody kind of voted, why don't you wholesale them individually to 11 of us? Right? We'll get plenty of equity, cash flowing deals, brand new. They're phenomenal deals, and we'll give you a meaty wholesale deal for each one of them, a wholesale fee for each one of them. And so, long story short, within 2 months, we had wholesaled those 11 properties and made almost $600,000 of wholesale fee. He took 300K. I took 300K. I didn't even know this deal existed. Never heard of this particular area of Daytona Beach Shores. Did not know it existed. It was impossible for him to do the deal by himself. So it needed both. Like you said, win-win. This was actually win-win-win
Yeah.
because Justin won, I won. That was a lot of work on my part and a lot of work on his part, but I'll do that for 300K in 2 months,
Yeah.
right? And then what's even better, the best part is that we had the choice to raise private capital and keep these 11 properties ourselves. And if we had, he and I would have split it 50-50, and he'd have gotten $1 million of equity. So 8 grand in the bank to being a millionaire. But he didn't want to do that because he wanted, like, he believes hardcore in the mission of White Feather, which is to help all of our members build financial freedom. And he said, if we hoard all of this equity ourselves, it's not the most good we can do.
Mm.
We don't need to make all the money. Let's make 30% of what we could make
Mm-hmm.
and give away over $1 million of equity. And 11 people in White Feather will get great assets that will drive them toward financial freedom. That was his decision, by the way. I gave him the decision to make. And so he made it fast, right? That's a beautiful example of three things. One, where my deals come from now. Like I don't go out on Zillow. I'm not hunting down like I used to. I'm not handwriting cards, right? I've built a community now and we're all out there searching together.
Mm-hmm.
We also approach it with an abundance mentality. It's like it's not about just like let me gather everything, right? It's like, bro, you don't have to make everything. Like just
Yeah.
like provide value to everybody around you and structure it to where you get compensated for your time as well. And I promise you it'll work out, right? And then the third thing is most importantly with him, the number one sort of characteristic of people inside the White Feather community is action. It's an action bias, right? because I know you've got great education books, and it's all out there. Education and books and information, it's all available. Just go on ChatGPT and ask a question. It'll give you the answer. It's not about information anymore. It's about the action that's combined with that. And that's something that is really prevalent inside the community.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I know we had talked about that story in the past, but I couldn't remember the numbers, and it's just always like it blows me away. Most people here, they're searching for their first like $5,000 wholesale fee, and to get a $300,000 wholesale fee a piece, that's that's pretty
I
incredible. And
I had
people,
to I had to reshoot the wholesale module because of that. So like I grew up as well on the whole $5,000 wholesale fee sort of model.
yeah,
And like I mean my first wholesale was a double wholesale. It was two properties, and I wholesaled one of them for 5,000, one of them for 13,000, but it was a package. So I made 18 grand on my first wholesale deal back when I was a first lieutenant. And I
yeah,
was like riding high. It was my first deal I ever did, and I was like, I've got to be the greatest wholesaler in the history of the world,
yeah,
right? 18 grand.
yeah,
And I never was able to repeat that, by the way. I did one other for 5 grand, and then none of my other ones worked. And so, like, that was it. That was the extent of my wholesale career. But I remember teaching for years. You're going to go out there, you're going to make 3 to 5 grand on your wholesale deal. Every once in a while, you can make seven, something like that. I made 18 one time, but that's like an aberration. Just focus on the 5K. That
hmm,
was it. I taught that. I had to reshoot that whole module and tell them, like, okay, this is not normal, but
yeah,
I do have to tell you that it is possible technically to make $600,000 on a
yeah,
wholesale because I've seen it a few months ago, and technically it's possible. And I just that reframed in my head. And he was a student, by the way. He was a student in the accelerator at the time, the real estate investor training that I run. He was a student in that training course at the time that he did that deal.
yeah, yeah. That's incredible.
Crazy.
And yeah, and there's another guy, John Sharkey. He came on my podcast. He's a West Pointer who's in commercial real estate. Had a similar story about a big commercial deal that he controlled, did a bunch of due diligence on. For one reason or another, it didn't work for them, but they had control of the asset. And that's, you hear a lot of people talk about, you don't have to own assets, you just have to control them in a lot of
Yeah.
cases to make good money because they controlled it. They had the option to buy it. And instead, they let somebody else step into their shoes, purchase the property for a big fee. And it was several $100,000 of wholesale fees. So it's incredible what's possible when you start to think big like that.
Yeah, and all you have to do is look at the different pieces that have to be in place. Like there are people who, like me, and actually I think probably like you now, where we have a lot going on. We have a lot of businesses, we have a lot of other things. We don't want to be spending the time trying to hunt down and negotiate deals and all that stuff. So if you hand deliver a pre-negotiated deal that's in contract form, and all I have to do is pay you 20 grand, and now I can take down that really good deal that fits my portfolio really well. Oh, that's worth so much more than 20 grand to me because of the time and effort that was saved. Because how many hours did you put in to find that? It's worth it for you because you're trading time for money. But whenever you're in a certain level, you want to trade money for time, right? I will happily trade money for time because I don't have very much time,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. One other thing too that you did this year that I wanted to ask you about is you started a fund. You call it the Shield Fund. Most investors don't start with a fund. They start by borrowing money for specific individual deals. But many who stick with it over time, eventually then they form a fund to purchase deals. So can you share for people who maybe have done some deals, maybe they've thought about a fund, they're not really sure what it does, like what specifically is the purpose of your fund? And then maybe some of the pros and cons for people that are thinking about doing something similar.
yeah. So there's what I would say is there's two. Um, okay, so when most people think about syndications, they think about. I'm a Marine, so I'm just gonna oversimplify
Yeah,
everything because that's just
it's
how I
perfect.
operate, right? So a syndication is where, the way I understand it, is where you you got a big piece of property and you don't have enough money to take it down. And so I call Kirby and I call Justin and I call Dave and I say, hey guys, you got a little bit of cash, I got a little bit of cash. Together we got a lot of cash and we can buy this thing together. So I'm gonna run it. I'm the operator. I'll take care of everything. I'll run the management. I'll do all the work. And so I'll take a big piece of the profits, but you guys just wire money. And you're limited partners, right? Meaning you don't really run anything. You're not it's total passive for you. So you and then you'll get kicked out a certain return. So you bring your friends together, they invest in this syndication, but it's into a single property, typically an apartment building or something like that. That's a syndication. A fund is another type of syndication that has the ability to buy and sell different properties over the course of time. Now, you typically have fund parameters where you say these are the types of properties, maybe this is the geographic location, these are the rough parameters of what's going to go in and out of the fund, but it gives you a lot more freedom as a manager to make decisions. And typically your funds are not year long or 2 year long. They're like 5 to 10 year long funds. Like we've got something called the White Feather Freedom Fund, which is a fund that's based out of Northeast Florida in Jacksonville. And it's meant to, I mean, we're doing ground up development. We bought 2 greenfield lots and we're just finished actually building these luxury townhomes that we're going to sell. We bought properties that we ran as short-term rentals, a bed and breakfast, various like an apartment building. All these things are in the fund and they cash flow and then we sell them and then all that stuff. And each of the people invested in that fund, they get their distributions from it. So that's how a fund works. It's just more flexibility than a syndication. And typically it's a longer framework. And then you have parameters like as an investor, you're going to get anywhere, you'll get like maybe 8% or 9% preferred return. And then your internal rate of return can be anywhere between 13 and 18%. That's a fun parameter. It's not set expectations. It's more loose. The Shield Fund is something that I'm very, very proud of because normally we focus entirely on real estate, right? However, I did buy a whole bunch of Bitcoin a few months ago, and
Yeah.
I'm very happy about it. And so I'm not saying buy Bitcoin. I'm saying I bought Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, right? There are you get to a point where like, for me, real estate is king. I love real estate and so on. But there are absolutely other things that I'm interested in. And one of the things that I'm interested in is helping people get out of toxic debt, right? One of the things that because what I see over and over inside White Feather, it's mostly people that are not in toxic debt. It's mostly people that are like, hey, I want to buy a rental property, or I want to use my VA loan and buy a property or whatever. Or I've got my IRA and I just learned you could self-direct it. I want to learn how to mitigate taxes. But there are millions of military veterans and first responders out there that are swimming in toxic debt, and they're not thinking about using their IRA. They don't even have an IRA,
Yeah.
right? And so it's been on my heart for a long time to build out a community that helps people at their most vulnerable. And so that we're in the process of doing that, but that's another conversation. The Shield Fund, and I won't get into too many of the technical details because that'll be boring, but like basically when somebody, let's just say I run up a bunch of credit card debt and I get behind and I can't get caught up. And the credit card company says, you know what? You're too far behind. I'm just going to send it to collections. So they send it to collections. And this happens in the billions, tens of billions of dollars of debt, of toxic debt that's 16 to 25% interest rates. And so that all gets sent to the collections agencies, and then the collections agencies, right? I mean, if anybody who's listening to this, if you think of a collections agency, just think in your mind how they act.
Yeah.
Like, how
Yeah.
do they collect? Are they
Yeah.
nice people? Are they typically
Right.
law-abiding, kind of like, hey, no, they're thugs, right?
Yeah.
And they try to intimidate you and do all this stuff. Anyway, so surprise, surprise, there's a lot of these collections agencies that don't actually follow the Fair Credit Reporting Act or any of the other legislation that's been passed to protect, consumers from predatory practices. And so what happens is a lot of the debt that they assume is not valid. And so if someone were to have a team of attorneys that go after them and they use the law to basically determine if something is valid or not, if it's invalid, then they can effectively bring a case to wipe away that debt
Mm.
because it's not valid debt because it wasn't legally obtained or legally um, whatever. I'm not going to get into too much of the details. That's where the lawyers come in. But long story short is we are helping military veterans, first responders as much as possible who are in toxic debt actually get as much of their debt as we can invalidated, help get them back on a path to financial freedom by we've created a free program to teach them how to budget, how to, how to, to keep from getting back into this trap again, right? And how to get back on their feet. And at the same time, invalidating the debt from the collections agencies. Well, when the debt goes away, there's a big margin left, right? And so the investors in the Shield Fund get a 20% preferred return, right? So,
Wow.
so people that are in Whitefeather that are invested in the Shield Fund, they invest 50 grand, whatever, they get a 20% preferred return. So for those of you that don't know, a preferred return is it's the first money out. It's the most protected money. It's the first money out before anybody else gets paid. And so a 20% fixed return is what they get. And then the fund managers get their fee. And then, of course, the attorneys and all that, right? But what's most exciting about it for me is that it's built around invalidating the debt for those people. I've got a buddy of mine who was in the Air Force, just terrible financial habits, right? Shocking, right? It's like, oh, a military person with terrible
Yeah.
financial habits. Like, whoa, that's
It's pretty
ring
par for
ring
the
the news,
course. Yeah.
right? Yeah. And so he was in $70,000 of various types of personal debt, unsecured debt, credit card, whatever. Went to collections. Collections is hounding him, racking up whatever. They were able to, our partners were able to get that down. Basically, they were able to put in work the process for invalidating almost 60,000 of that debt and consolidating it down to around 10 grand of what he would then have to pay in order to get this debt
Wow.
invalidated. So it's a multi-year process, but my point is eventually that will go off of his credit. Eventually he'll have a fraction of the payment every month that he had before. And also, as a part of this, he'll get taught the basics of what he needs to not carry expensive credit card debt, to budget, to be able to
Hmm.
actually get himself on a path where he can use his VA loan, which he still has, to repair his credit, use his VA loan to buy a home. And then, dude, once you're there, once you're a homeowner and you've got your budget down and you're starting to feel excited about your future, you know this. It's just a matter of making small choices over time, and you can live whatever kind of life you can dream.
Yeah.